I'm Anthony Sitko from Capes on the Couch, a show that examines the mental health issues of comic book characters, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other stupendously geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to episode 308 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we discuss social media use for the hobby podcaster. In this week's Better Podnerings, topics include SP finding a very exciting and very helpful VDO.ninja update, and, as requested by our audience, I run down my editing workflow with the chapter markers. And finally, in this week's Better Podback, we run down some Discord server interactions. Lauren, why don't you interact with the intro and start it now?
This is Better Podcasting. We are hobby podcasters through and through, just like you. That's why we are different. We minimize the money talk so that you can focus on building a better podcast.
Welcome to episode number 308 of Better Podcasting. I'm Steven, and if you're on the video side of things, over there is SP. I could be over there, I could be above you, I could be below you, I could be on either side of you. It's just nowhere if it's just over there. By the way, I, for the audio listeners, was pointing to the left of my frame, which is always really hard to do because you see it differently and it's just confusing. It always looks like you've had one too many Molsons, but I digress. We're here to talk about podcasting, and we wanted to let you know, if you have not checked out our back catalog, we would encourage you to go to betterpodcasting.com. There is a whole plethora of back content, and some of the content, you might hear different things happen and be discussed because at different points in the many years we've been doing this show, which seems like 30 at this point, things have evolved and changed. And that includes today's topic, which is very different than the last time we talked about it. And I am so excited to talk about social media today. Are you, SP? It's definitely been a whirlwind this past few years, and we're going to talk about some of the changes and what you should do to take advantage of it. If you are a podcaster, you are also a showman and a marketeer as well. ABC, but in this case it's ABP. Always be promoting is the mantra you should use. I thought it was always be podcasting. Like no matter what you're doing in your life, you go to work, you get up, you just podcast all day. Well, that's true, but you're also promoting while you're podcasting. So ABP works either way. So it's really cool to remember that instead of ABC. Anyway, you are also a public figure of sorts. You do have international and hopefully someday soon interplanetary reach. Since you are listening to this show, we're going to assume you are a hobby podcaster with limited or no budget. Seems to be the way things go for hobby podcasters. So you won't be placing billboards up around the United States freeway system. Wouldn't help you if you were a local Canadian podcast. Anyway, you won't be placing never-ending ads in Acast, Overcast, or Spotify marketplaces. You're not going to be booking pay to play or play to pay late night talk host show interview slots. And you're definitely not going to be touring around the world for cameo appearances at podcast studios everywhere. Nope. Your best promotional bet after making great content is using social media. This is not new. Twitter basically started as a place to share audio. If you're unfamiliar with that story, Twitter actually started as an entity called Odeo, Odeo, and it morphed into Twitter when they kind of figured out that they needed Twitter more than they needed Odeo, which was a place to promote podcasting. In the meantime, microblogging sites and podcasting literally grew up hand in hand as a way to skirt gatekeeping for the everyday person. And by gatekeeping, I'm talking about like big production houses saying, no, you can't make this content. You can. That's what a podcast is. Also social media. So today, of course, social media is just part of everyday life. It's become a way to supplement your show's reach, create online communities for your show, and market and promote your episodes. In today's segment, we'll be discussing what's the best way to use social media to grow your show and have some additional fun with your content along the way. Before venturing too far into this topic as a whole, we need to ask you a question. Where do you want to build your audience? Do you want to grow a podcast, or do you want to develop a large following on social media? Because if you want to grow a large account on a service to go after influencer monetization, that's an entirely different conversation that we will not be having today. To be blunt, we're referring to growing a TikTok account, a YouTube channel, or an Instagram following, but it does apply to any other outlet that isn't a podcasting distribution hub as well. These are different conversations that do not assume podcasting is your primary product. That's what we're doing. And arguably, your focus would be on being an influencer versus being a hobby podcaster if you choose to go that route. However, if your main goal is to use social media to help grow your hobby podcast, develop a community around your show, or create content that will assist you with the development of your podcast, that is what we'll be discussing today. So if you want your primary audience to be your podcasting audience, that is what this segment is for.
Now, since we are discussing social media right now as it relates to podcasting, it might help to define what social media we will be talking about. So let's run down some of the different social media platforms, and we'll start with the new kid on the block, arguably the big kid on the block too right now in 2024, TikTok. Now, SP doesn't actually have a TikTok account, and he won't for the foreseeable future, but on the flip side, I'm actually an avid TikTok user, but as a consumer, I don't actually use it for my podcast or for creating content. But it's impossible for us to not acknowledge right now the massive, huge rise in use with TikTok in recent years. This platform has just blown up. But we want to acknowledge a bit about TikTok is that TikTok is primary accessed via a mobile device, and the postings are limited to video, at least for all practical purposes right now, with music often involved and in a vertical format, of course. Now, TikTok has a rather good algorithm that is going to keep people scrolling through that app, and this can, of course, create the whole rabbit hole effect with users. This is TikTok's big win, and that's how it got so big, was just by its algorithm. Now, TikTok does have great ability to feed users content, and it's quickly also, though, trying to keep people there. For a while, you could share links wherever you wanted, but it's quickly closing itself off, making it harder to share links with other people outside of the platform. TikTok has seen an increase in making it difficult to use these links and send them to people. So keep that in mind from a podcast promotion perspective. You are going to be limited to the people who are on TikTok. So keep that in mind. It's going to be hard to get those posts off of the platform. But if you do make good TikTok content, it can be a great way to build your audience, just maybe not drive a traditional audience, as it's likely that this audience isn't going to be transferring from your TikTok account over to your podcast. At least we haven't seen it yet.
Your clip on TikTok is likely to be enjoyed, and then the users scroll on to the next video until the algorithm brings them back to another one of your videos. But this is a good moment for us to delve into this a little bit more. As we mentioned last week, a current trend is having short form clips of your podcast. As a hobby podcaster, you're probably motivated by having fun and creating content for others to enjoy. So it's worth at least acknowledging if people aren't consuming your content on another platform that wouldn't otherwise have been, how much does it really matter if they aren't being able to drive to your main feed? But really, that is a conversation bigger than just the social media discussion that we're having today, and fits more into one about multi-distribution formats, which we might have in the future. Another major social media player is Meta in all of its forms. The face space, the gram, and the threads. That's what we're talking about here. And the oldest part of the Meta platform right now, currently today, is Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg was the main creator of Facebook in 2004. Although lawsuits were settled in the 2008 timeframe with 3 other Harvard students, he was the Harvard student that is acknowledged to be the creator of Facebook. Facebook excels in connecting individuals through their friend groups and providing user-moderated groups to connect people with similar interests. Users can make text posts to their wall with media attached or create short vertical video reels. Facebook does use an algorithm to display posts that match your interests. It also can hide your posts from your friend group, but that's another story for another day. There is also a monetize aspect to Facebook that you can pay to promote your posts. There's the story, basically subverting the algorithm. From what we've researched and noted over the years, the Facebook promoted posts have been marginally effective at best for podcasters, but your mileage may vary. Just keep your eyes on it for now. It's also worth noting that Facebook has been a bit of the butt of the generational jokes, like Generation X, the millennials, that sort of thing. However, while these are jokes, they are rooted in reality. Generally speaking, there seems to be a bit of a broader Facebook appeal to people over a certain age demographic, maybe those with gray in their beard. So you may be inherently limiting who you are reaching with Facebook, and that's before considering that in 2024, every other post seems to be an ad, and every other post in between that is AI-driven garbage. But again, we digress. And yes, that's from both of us. I've noticed it, and Steven's noticed it. So, Steven, what's another meta property that we just mentioned?
It's my favorite one. And by that, I mean, I don't actually personally have an account on it, but it's Instagram, because Instagram is, of course, now a meta property. If you missed that many years ago, it is now a meta property, but it wasn't always that way, because Instagram was released on October 6th, 2010 in its current form after bouncing around development for a long time, including other formats that you might have heard called Bourbon, which was missing an A. And that was a mobile check-in app. That sounds kind of similar to Foursquare, don't you think? And for all of you young people, yeah, go Google what Foursquare was. Instagram was largely marketed as a photo sharing app, which is somewhat different than at the time it was created. All the microblogging tech sites that were out there like Facebook and Twitter, but in 2010, Facebook did officially acquire Instagram, and it does kind of operate it independently. So even though it's part of the meta properties, it still has its own user base, its own flavor, its own feel. Doesn't really cross-pollinate too much with Facebook. At least the user bases don't really treat it that way. In August of 2010, Instagram did introduce Reels, which was a bid to compete with TikTok, and does do a little bit of that. And Instagram really does lack text-only posts, which prevents it from being a true short message competitor, aka Twitter competitor. But that was soon addressed through a Instagram spin-off, and we'll come back to that in a little bit later. It's also worth noting that sharing off-platform content can be kind of like TikTok as well, where they're really trying to drive people to use Instagram. So again, when you share links, you're going to be having some difficulties if you're not logged into your account, if you're trying to play it on a desktop. So just like you see with TikTok, they're really trying to keep people in the platform using it the way they want to have it used. But if you are a part of the service, it can be a little easier to use those share links when they are shared with you, as long as you're logged into an account. Now, I said a minute ago we would get back to the text-only option. Well, it exists now.
Does. Threads was launched to a somewhat mixed reaction barely a year ago on July 5th, 2023. It was in the midst of all the Twitter/X controversy, and it was an easy ad since you could use your existing Instagram login to create an account. It was just bingo. They had millions of users within the first day. But despite a lot of initial confusion on what Threads was, it did miss some features at launch, and it was the third major meta app. Currently, the application enjoys a broad reach and usage despite all those issues with the platform. Now, the thread algorithm is definitely present, just like in TikTok, but it's a more universal app. It allows video, photo sharing, and text-only posts, so very Twitter-esque. It's an evolving space, and our jury is still out on the app so far, but it is growing in an increasingly crowded space, so I guess that's good. It's also worth noting that Threads has shown to be making an active effort to embrace feature development with the future in mind. This includes beta testing Fediverse sharing, which could yield cross-platform sharing in the future. The Fediverse in itself has question marks, but in 2024, you can at least use it to potentially get a 2-for-1 distribution method, coupling it with another Fediverse place such as Mastodon. One unique offering that we should call out is that because Threads is based on Instagram sharing login information, remember that? That means that there is already a series of users who are ready to go on Threads. And as the exodus continues, it keeps happening in waves whenever something happens over an X. It's worked in some cases to drive adoption, but it's also not guaranteed to make it the platform of choice for Instagram users who are looking for an X alternative.
All right, let's move on to SP's favorite one. This is Reddit, because Reddit is almost as old as Facebook and can trace its origins back to the summer of 2005. Reddit is more old-style formatted, and is a little bit different from traditional social media, but it does have the advantage of great SEO. Now, I want to turn this over to SP because he is the Reddit guru on here, and I know right now he's going to say, Steven, have you ever searched for a subject, then added the words Reddit to your search query? To which I would say that's pretty much the only way I use Google these days.
I was going to say, I learned that from you, Dad. I learned that from you. Okay, you will often end up seeing several posts that are directed directly to your answer or closely thereof if you do a search, for that matter, on any search algorithm. When you put the search terms and you put Reddit on it, there's a lot of great posts that come up. Now, Reddit is divided up into smaller portions called subreddits that are subject specific and moderated by a few individuals. You can create your own subreddit for your show or your topic of choice, but you would have to actively moderate it, and you would probably have to actively promote it, mention it on your show at the very least every episode. Reddit is mostly text-based posting and commenting, but depending on the subreddit, posting rules, you can post images, you can post polls and videos as well. It does have that capability, but a lot of people use Reddit in the text-only space. Outside of your own subreddit, there are numerous subreddits that will apply to your show's main topic and subject matter. And compared to several of the other platforms we're discussing today, Reddit has some unique shortcomings that you'll need to work around. Particularly, it has a much more closed feeling. What do we mean by that? For example, users are generally going to be finding your content by seeking out your subreddit. This means that their posts aren't always being interspersed among other posts in their feed. Additionally, setting up your own subreddit is a heavier lift than just creating a profile for your podcast. You have to set up rules for your subreddit, perhaps form a mod team to make sure that it's covered 24/7 because the sun doesn't set on the internet, and maybe even learn a new set of admin tools. With Reddit, you'll be looking to build your own community, which can definitely be a valuable type of social media. So there's a bonus, but it is an extra layer versus traditional account-based social media. So it is a little bit different, or could be considered a little bit different than a traditional social media application.
Now, for this next category, you're going to be scratching your head saying, what? Why are you calling that social media? And we're talking about YouTube. Because like Reddit, YouTube can trace its origins back to 2005, but it became a Google property in 2006. Now, we will explain this in a second here about why we're calling YouTube social media, because YouTube is basically a video hosting platform, but it can be a community through the comments and community posts. And it even ventured into the idea of YouTube Shorts to compete with platforms like TikTok and Instagram Reels. So you can build a community around it. There are monetization options easily on YouTube with ads and memberships, but as with other platforms, discovery and promotion are a bit of a secret algorithm. So how you get into that algorithm is something you're going to have to try to figure out how you do that and how you slide into somebody's feed. To be honest, the traditional YouTube platform in itself, not Shorts, is one that we could see people making a case to really argue that it's not social media. But when you do throw in the YouTube Shorts area, and the communities that seem to be formed around channels, including the use of YouTube Shorts and how people are using those now, we felt like we would be remiss if we did not mention YouTube in the idea of the social media aspect.
So we're going to transition here from some of the main social media platforms to some of the social media platforms that might have lesser reach currently, but might have some growth in the future to become one of the bigger places, or maybe connected through the Fediverse into a conglomeration of social media, much like email was back in the day, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is Mastodon, which arguably is what most people think of when they think of the Fediverse that just don't know what the Fediverse is. They'll go to something like Mastodon. Mastodon is one of the main ways to enter into the Fediverse. However, it's extremely distributed through servers. Stephen had one, at least at one point in time. I haven't asked if Mastodon still exists or not, but he has one. Okay. And you have to have that server, and then you create your account on the server, and that's where you log into. It's not a central login to a central server. Now, due to the complexities of gaining and maintaining an account, Mastodon was quickly overtaken by the easier and more familiar Threads as of late, but it remains as a possible place to post and build a community, albeit a little bit less active and a smaller overall community. Mastodon can be another community tool if you want to invest the time and likely money into it. With Mastodon, there are many different servers, and they all have their own rules and operational procedures. And they can even close themselves off to other parts of the Fediverse. There are some podcast community-specific Mastodon servers out there, but there is a lot of consideration you need to have if you want to embark on this. It takes some time and effort, just like many of the community-related options we're discussing today. But we wanted to at least acknowledge some of the potential benefits and unique offerings Mastodon has in this regard, especially if your niche happens to have some activity on Mastodon. We mention this because Mastodon seems to have some major activity for certain niches and absolutely crickets with others. Out of our entire list we have today, Mastodon is probably the biggest one that we'd put our usual "your mileage may vary" disclaimer on it, and it might vary quite a bit just based on what you see and what you can get out of it.
So for our next one here, I look out my window and I go, whoa, that sky is gray. But if it wasn't a rainy day, I would go, that sky is blue, because we're talking about blue sky. As we record this, we are actually right now seeing the tail end of another big exodus, or Twitter exodus, if you'd like to refer to it by its prior name. And there has been, through this exodus, a bit of a boom happening in blue sky. There have been multiple blips that we've observed since blue sky came on the scene, including a huge increase when X became essentially unable to be used in a certain part of the world. That part of the world seemed to choose blue sky as its platform. Just a short time ago, it looked actually to SP and I like blue sky had kind of lost the war, but there has been a marked increase in recent months, giving it a bit of a breath of new life as a potential Twitter alternative, but it's still not there yet, so the jury is still out. As such, we'll lead with this disclaimer that we'll be talking about the blue sky that we have seen over the last year or so, not what we are currently seeing in this week of this month of 2024, which seems to be a little elevated over what we have seen over the last short while. Without question, in October 2024, as we record this, blue sky is the closest Twitter copy that exists right now. If you've used Twitter, you're going to go to blue sky, you're going to go, this looks familiar. There's no ifs, ands, or but about it. It is the closest Twitter clone that we have seen out there. At least that has a decent sized base to it. The platform is still limited by the community that currently exists on it, but if you have used Twitter in recent years, you might have a very comfortable experience sliding into blue sky. Also, in case you missed it, for a long time, you did have to have an invite to get on blue sky, but that is gone. It is wide open to anybody that wants to sign in right now. And I will throw a personal note out here. As much as I did write off blue sky a few months back, I do feel like right now in recent experiences, I've been able to use it the best if I want to go search for some current events information. Like if, a reality television show that happens with a bunch of people living in a house over the course of the summer had its finale, I was able to easily get on Blue Sky and search information and chatter about that when on Mastodon, on Threads, it was crickets. So I will say that there has been, I think, a bit of a current events boom. I've seen that with football talk as well, to be honest. But we will see what happens because history might repeat itself and that bubble might burst again.
So the next one that we're going to talk about, I'll admit, when we first broached this subject, I had a slightly different viewpoint on this. I was okay with it. I am no longer okay with it. And it's kind of sad that it took me so long to get to this point. I'm guessing a bunch of you know where I'm going at this point, but I grew up in social media with this platform. I was okay with everything that had happened to this platform, even through its acquisition a couple of years ago. Yeah, I just said it. And so a bunch of you that hadn't clued in know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I'm talking about what used to be called Twitter, what is now called X. And you need to refer to it as X. It is its legal name. And I will argue that X is so far distinctly different from Twitter that you really need to call it X. Your account might be the same, but everything else about it is pretty different. Now, months later, after I was the one that I believe approached this topic with you, Stephen, I no longer am a fan of X, and I will use it as sparingly as I absolutely have to. Since the sale of Twitter, the space has become less and less inviting, and the app has triggered waves of exodus from the platform every few months, it seems. There's some big change that a new group of people just cannot live with anymore. And your ability to reach other people, your ability to have conversations gets smaller and smaller and smaller. What was once a very inviting place to promote your show and build a community is no longer an inviting space for anyone. Maybe everyone is a better term to use there, because there's certain portions of the population and maybe bots that really like it. But in 2024, we would encourage you to think long and hard about trying to utilize this particular app as a public-facing arm to your show's reach. Once again, we have a special current events footnote for X as we record this in October 2024. There was recently a terms of service change that involved X, and it is being allowed to use your content for training AI. Given your hard work of producing your podcast, you may want to really consider whether you want to allow your content to be used for this purpose. You might be okay with it, but you might not either. So we wanted to bring it up so you had the information for you to make the choice for yourself. And that concludes what we're going to talk about X probably for the foreseeable future on the show.
Maybe we should just exit off our list.
I would.
Moving on, let's talk a little bit about Tumblr. To the surprise of a few of you, yes, Tumblr does technically still exist. However, like Twitter and X, Tumblr is no longer the bustling nexus of online discourse that it once was. Tumblr can trace back its roots to 2006 and 2007 timeframe, but was acquired by Yahoo! In 2013, which was then acquired by Verizon in 2017. Verizon Media was formed in 2019, and Tumblr was sold to Automatic later that same year. Automatic has sold user data to Midjourney and OpenAI to help train those applications, and announced a couple months ago that Tumblr's backend would transform to an architecture derived from WordPress, which is also by Automatic. So for all of these reasons, because it technically exists, we had to acknowledge it, but we would recommend you think long and hard before attempting to get back into those tumbleweeds. Tumblr.
Moving on, we're going to discuss one of our favorite platforms right now is Discord. It was released in 2015, and it began its life as an alternative platform-free chat and voice call application for video gamers. Although over the years, Discord has now evolved into a chat room-esque community hub with many different Discord servers. The servers are difficult to search through, though, and to find a community and or topic you are interested in mostly you end up going on recommendations for other people. I've yet to be successful in using a Discord server search, but I know one exists. But once you have a community, that it has become for now a great central online gathering place. It really has. You can go home online to different places. Discord has many bots and add-ons to customize the space, but like Reddit, you have to moderate it yourself. Both of us enjoy Discord. We have a server for our community, but we do acknowledge it is building the community based on somebody else's infrastructure. There's always a possibility Discord could shut down overnight and leave your community high and stranded, but we see no evidence of that happening right now. We're just mentioning that if the app itself or the company itself folds, then your community just disappears because that's where it's based. Now, as such, we would recommend that Discord stays in your lexicon for the moment, but we'll also caveat Discord with similar ones to the Reddit ones we mentioned earlier. You know, the ones about it potentially being more closed off compared to other platforms. It requires more community building approach and also the administration aspects to it as well. Next, this is one of your favorite podcasting social media platforms, Stephen.
Oh, you know me too well, because when I think about podcast social media, I think about the oldest social media app around, or at least the oldest we're aware of. I think about LinkedIn. LinkedIn was launched in 2003 and is primarily used to this date for professional networking, career development, and job seeking. So yeah, obviously I was joking. It's not my first go-to for podcasting. Neither of us would actually recommend that LinkedIn be in your go-to platforms for your hobby podcast for promoting. However, if your hobby podcast topic is potentially resonant with LinkedIn users who are within that base I just described, maybe there is an opportunity for you there to promote it. But there are other spaces we would recommend that you try to engage in first before you try LinkedIn. Quite frankly, we would say that if you weren't going to post on LinkedIn about the core essence of the theme of your podcast, we probably wouldn't recommend you think about using LinkedIn because your content probably won't apply. But if the core theme of your podcast does create topics and conversation with the LinkedIn community, maybe that would be your carve out. But I will just say this, and we will leave this individual anonymous. One of us is pretty adamant that for 99.9% of the podcasts out there, they don't belong on LinkedIn.
Dude, I'm scratching my head over which one of those is that, because I think it could be both of us.
Maybe. But moving on, we do have a non-platform special shout out that we want to give right now, which is live streaming. Okay, so this category isn't exactly a social media platform, but it's in the same vein as many of the fractured social media platforms out there that we just described. There is a method that we've seen some podcasters use successfully as a way to create chatter and buzz with their audience that is hard to find elsewise, and that is through the tool of live streaming. And yes, this crosses many platforms in multiple ways. You can do live streaming on things like YouTube and TikTok, Facebook and Twitch, but how you choose to live stream can really vary through a couple of different approaches.
The first approach, you can do what we do and just live stream in a broadcast style method. For example, live streaming your podcast recording session, or in some cases, treating your podcast as distribution method for your live streaming recording. Alternatively, live streaming can be a way to curate content and discussion about topics that you can use later in your podcast. Just a few years ago, you could hop onto Facebook or Twitter, make some posts, and engage in chatter. But could you use that chatter to build out content for your podcast? Yeah, of course you could. Engagement on these types of posts seems a lot tougher these days. However, it seems like some people who do live just chatting streams, it seems to have a reasonable amount of success. So if you have some time to pull out your phone and hang out on a live stream on your favorite live streaming capable platform, you might be able to use this as an extension of your social media reach. Think real you out in the wild, not in a contained environment. Just, hey, I was thinking of this, that sort of thing. And what do you think about it? Trying to get some engagement over that. finally, live streaming can just be how you might use other social media, just a straight up advertising method. You may not generate content in your live stream, but you can use it as a way to hang out with people. Even it's a, hey there, so-and-so, as they join and promote your podcast. And as an aside, a couple years ago, I was using Instagram Live to stream some of my walks with Cooper. For those that don't know, my daughter has a dog, Cooper. He lived with us for a while as a golden retriever, about 100 pounds, and needed to go walking. So I would live stream a little bit on my walks, about a minute or so, and I would just say what was on my mind. So you can use it however you want to. I never applied it to podcasting other than to say, hey, I might be using this podcast at this point in time. So I have tried this. If I had continued to do it long term, might have been a little bit better, but I would have to curate my audience specifically to the topic that I was using. So just a little tips and trips with that. Now, we've talked a lot about where you would want to use social media, all the apps involved. What are some limitations to using social media for your hobby podcast, Stephen?
If you're listening to the show, the odds are very high you regularly use some form of social media. However, as hobby podcasters, the odds are also high that you do not have a plethora of time available to spend countless hours on social media promoting your podcasts. Your main limitation to using social media for your hobby podcast will likely be time. If you are a full-time student, or you have a full-time job, or maybe multiple jobs, or multiple things that are taking up all of your time, you are going to be very limited in how you create and execute your social media strategy. And this is going to limit what you can do with your social media for your podcast. Not to mention, in your free time, you are also going to be preparing, researching, recording, editing, publishing your podcast itself. So even if you do schedule posts throughout the day for one or maybe multiple social media platforms, you still are going to be limited on how much time you can put into scheduling those posts and thus engaging with your audience on them. We won't put a number on how much time we think that you will have available for social media because everybody's situation is different, but we will highlight that we think the driving limitation you'll have as a hobby podcaster is going to be time.
Likewise, you won't have time to have a dedicated presence everywhere. Your limited times means you won't be able to keep up with posting and responding on 11 different social media applications. Does this mean that you won't be able to post everywhere? No, not necessarily, but it will mean that you won't be able to be as engaged with your audience everywhere. Also, keep in mind that help in this realm, a social media manager is what I'm thinking about, costs money. Now, whether it is hiring a social media manager or buying digital tools for scheduling, the money is going to have to be there. And we're not going to tell you not to do it. Each show and circumstance is different, but we will state that most hobby podcasters will not be able to take this step due to a lack of money available for the show, or maybe a lack of being able to monetize your show. Now, another limitation that you might have as a hobby podcaster is personal and brand crossovers. Stephen, this is a big one for you.
Yeah, because in both podcasting and other content creation, often businesses themselves, if they're using these tools, will be dedicating an account to their brand. This is because usually the brand or the company wants to make sure things are very clear of which posts represent their business or their brand. And of course, the users behind them probably have personal accounts, and it'll be very clear which reflect their personal accounts. You also don't necessarily want to have your brand associated with just one person either. But the issue as a hobby podcaster is that without a decent team effort, it can be really hard to maintain two accounts on a platform successfully. For example, one for your personal account and posts, and one for your brand account and posts. This is largely, of course, due to that time factor. If you're trying to make a post, where are you going to put it? This is something you'd have to consider if you have both. Every time you make a post, is it going to belong on your personal account or your brand account? And making that decision and crafting that unique content for multiple accounts are time that you are not putting into your podcast. It can be really hard to find that balance between two or more social media accounts if that is what you choose to do, is create one for your podcast brand itself. The factor is amplified as well when you consider that social media is so fractured in 2024. Instead of just one account on multiple platforms, you could be dealing with your personal account and a brand account for your podcast, and that just compounds.
The last limitation that you might run into that we're going to talk about today as a hobby podcaster is the dreaded time zones. Your podcast is going to go out to the entire world, and hopefully that means that you have people listening in different parts of the world. Generally speaking, social media works best when there's engagement with people. This means that if you're only able to engage with people at certain times, it can limit the effectiveness of your social media. As a hobbyist, you may not have a large team of people across different time zones to run the accounts, and you may not have the aforementioned finances to get that help, including in the realm of services that allow you to create content off hours. There are some affordable tools out there, but again, that will take some more of your time to actually use, set them up, and let them go and monitor them as well. It's not a one and done. You need to monitor all of this because social media can be very dynamic. So even if it's automated posts, you need to keep aware of what's going on at all times. Now, we've been through all of this. Stephen, this is a hallmark of better podcasting. And what I mean by that is best practices for whatever we're talking about, in this case, social media use.
All right, the first best practice that we're going to mention is consistency. Just like with so many things, consistency really is key behind social media, especially when you're trying to engage with people. If you're not consistent, you're going to find a lack of engagement, and thus the social media becomes ineffective. And to that point, you want to think about the key times for making the posting and interactions. Yes, you need to think about what we just said. The world's 24/7, but when are you going to be able to consistently engage with content? Maybe try to keep the postings within those hours so that you know if someone does reply back, you can engage with that content. As well, keep in mind that you can get sucked into the rabbit hole of social media and try to reply to everything. Try to enforce the 80-20 rule. Really should be engaged and be interesting 80% of the time and promote 20% of the time. You don't want to come off as a spam account. You want to make sure you are using social media for the social aspect and primarily be engaging in the content. And then you just try to bring them over to the podcast and promote.
I want to say something that happened to me last weekend. So I was in another Discord server and I was just hanging out. I believe it was on Sunday, and somebody was cleaning and they were like, I need a recommendation for a podcast. I recommended every single podcast that I considered to be a great podcast except for mine. And so it was like 8, 9, 10. I forget however many there were on there. And then the first person to post back was, I wonder if this should be in the self-promoting channel. I'm like, yeah, but none of them are mine. So allow people to make recommendations of not your content. It's the same way of, hey, Stephen, do you have any good book recommendations or any good movie recommendations? We're talking about podcasts here. So it's a little bit of a nuance, but 80% interesting, I think, would include recommending other great content out there that is interesting. Even though you're a podcaster, you can recommend other podcasters that are good. Just a little bit of a nuance that I have. There's another community on Reddit that I really have an issue about this on. It's not our podcasting, but it's something else. All right. Also, dedicate time to spend on whatever social media you choose to use. Promotion and marketing is one of the most important things you can do for your podcast if you want to grow your audience. It doesn't happen magically. You actually have to go out and do it. If you find yourself having trouble dedicating time to spend on social media, set an alarm on your phone or your watch throughout the week, or schedule time on your calendar. It's that important. And if you don't spend the time on it, then your social media is going to look very empty. And that could negatively reflect on your podcast if anyone actually comes across the account to see an empty list of posts there. Now, Stephen, what's next?
What's next? Clips. That's right. I'm talking about the late 90s, mid 2000s Clippy from Microsoft Office. No, I'm not talking about Clippy. I'm talking about using clips on platforms that make sense. Because if you have a podcast, you're probably going to feel a bit of a desire to want to use clips for your social media. But you need to do these carefully and not try to force them in platforms where the clips don't belong. Some platforms that we talked about today are inherently more text-based than others. And if you try to break outside of the community mold that is on those social media platforms, people might start to ignore your account, or you might lose your effectiveness, especially when there's algorithms involved, if you're not fitting what the platform is desired to be for. So use your clips carefully and make sure you're using them effectively on the platforms when you choose to use them.
Also, take advice from Captain Jean-Luc Picard on the nice Enterprise. Engage. Yeah, that's, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's what he said to start warp. It's engage. So engage with the content on the platforms that you choose to be on. Using social media in a one-directional manner will likely make you feel hollow and spammy and above other people. People want to be social on social media. Think of it as a conversation, not a lecture, and engage and have a conversation with other people. Remember, if you are using your social media for podcast promotion, you need to employ some sales tactics. How are you going to get them in the door to properly check out your podcast? You may need to craft posts differently than if you craft a personal post. You'd want to post content that entices the user, but also leaves them wanting to explore more of your show. If you are truly trying to leverage social media as marketing, you're going to need to consider how you can entice engagement, but not give away so much that people aren't intrigued to check out your podcast. This can be very hard to achieve successfully, especially with limited time as a hobby podcaster. And I'll go back to an old conversation I actually had with a very noted podcaster on Twitter. It was obviously a crafted conversation that he was having with somebody else. And they got to talk about what mic would be easier to use. And they were talking about using the Blue Yeti. And I was like, oh, no. You don't want the Blue Yeti. You want to use something at the time, the AT2005, the Audio-Technica AT2005, or the ATR 2100. It was, I think, before the days of the Samsung Q2U. So I brought those out. I got berated by this person. I will refrain from saying who it was, but it was obviously like I went off script and he was like, no, we need to talk about this. Like, no, we don't. We need to talk about this, and don't discount me just because I run a hobby podcast. I actually might know what I'm talking about. So yeah, if you do run a script with somebody else, and I know that is out there, just make sure you have to be able to jibe a little bit with the interactions that you're getting and don't come off like a jerk.
And speaking of coming off like a jerk, don't tell people where they should be on social media, which means you, as the podcaster trying to be on social media, should not listen to what other people are saying about where to go for your social media choice. The social media space is currently in 2024 so fractured, you are going to find so many different opinions of which platform is best. All of the opinions are wrong, every single one of them. Okay, technically not, but our point here is that you should treat them as such and know that your podcast and what you want to do is unique, and your engagement is going to maybe be different than the podcaster sitting next to you. Some methods will fit better for certain podcasts, and some platforms will be a better fit for others. Where and how you have success is going to vary based on your specific podcast and your specific niche.
You may want to stretch yourself a bit and check out a couple of different platforms. You may not be able to determine which works best for you without actually giving it a try. If you fixate on one platform right away, you might not be able to gauge success without comparing it to another. But when you do this, and just be aware of your time, if you are stretching yourself, try to set yourself an endpoint. When will you make a decision of where you want to focus your efforts and try to stick with that time frame? Otherwise, things get very hairy just time-wise for you. And that way, hopefully, you will keep the fun in your hobby podcast, or at least the social media aspect of your podcast. So in summary, for this whole section here, social media offerings have changed a bunch over the last few years alone, and it's important to keep current for your podcast. As we mentioned, you can effectively use social media to promote and market your show, form a community, and just have some fun. And that's why you're podcasting, right? If you're listening to this show, you're doing a hobby podcast and you're doing it for fun. What's your favorite way to use social media for your show? Which social media applications are your favorite? Let us know some examples of how social media has worked for your show. We'd love to share your experiences and your answers to these questions here on Better Podcasting. So let us know and take part in our conversation right here with other podcasters.
And part of the way that you can participate in that conversation is by answering this question that came up while we were live streaming this. Because if you didn't know this, we stream this show live when we do record. And Liberty Dude asked us the question, can guesting on other shows, not necessarily podcasts, be considered social media use? So we won't talk about that, but we'll turn that over to you. How do you think that fits into social media? Come on over to our Discord at betterpodcasting.com/Discord or find all of our contact information over on betterpodcasting.com/contact. You know, SP, I'm so excited to have a VDO.ninja buddy finally.
I know. You've been waiting for this for a long time. Not only a buddy, but a buddy that actually pays attention to the space.
Absolutely, because if you didn't know this, SP likes to podcast. And when he likes to podcast, he likes to follow the latest updates in the tools that he uses. And when he does that, sometimes he finds out information before I can find it. And you found something really cool that I am so glad you found.
Mostly because I got in the Discord for VDO, but version 2.6 of VDO.ninja, or maybe it's 26, I don't know. Anyway, VDO.ninja was released to GitHub, and it was also applied to the production available at VDO.ninja. In that release, the ability to record, support, I think it's audio, isolated audio for several guests in sync without external software or virtual cables. This means if you're doing an audio only show, you don't need to pair VDO.ninja with anything. You could just be on VDO.ninja and you can record just like you would on Discord using the Craig bot. It's the same sort of concept. Okay, so in theory, this is what is supposed to happen. Stephen, I know you haven't had a chance to try this since this news came out. I recorded Artie's Attic last night, and on a whim, I was like, you know what? We're going to talk about it tomorrow night. I'm just going to try it. So a couple of things. I'm probably doing it wrong, but the only record button I found for this was on my channel as director. I couldn't find a recording capability for everyone else. I didn't know if that was going to be multitrack, so I didn't continue to search in everybody else's audio settings. I don't know if everybody else is supposed to hit the record button individually on their machines. So there's a lot that I don't know about this yet. Stephen, maybe I'm wrong and you know a lot about this, but there's more that I need to find out before I start recommending this as the way to do things, because I couldn't find a way to record everybody on my director's chair. So there's that, but it does look promising that you could just use VDO for an audio only experience. You can also use it to record locally video, and you can record everybody's video on your own. So there are recording options available in VDO. Again, you don't need to use OBS. We use it because it's, I think, more stable right now, but in the future, that might not be the case.
So what I will throw out is, yes, I have not had a chance to look at this, but what I will throw out is that the way I read the news was that the multi-channel audio, it called out being compatible with OBS. And so the way I assume that would be is it would be like a dedicated feed or something, kind of like you use video now, where you can get a different video feed for every single participant. I know it's specific. I believe it's specifically called out OBS. So I assumed that it wouldn't be right in the director panel myself, but I don't know. I haven't had a chance to look into it. So my understanding or, perception of what this might be could be way off base.
Yeah, the other thing is when I did record my own audio channel in VDO, it came out as a .webm file, a WebM file, and you have to convert that somehow. I can bring it up in Audacity, but I can't bring it up in Vegas, for instance. So you have to be careful what application you have to actually use the audio if you record directly in VDO. So that's something I did. However, you had the opportunity to try out something new on your own that you are very excited about. And then there was actually a question about it too that we'll get to later.
Yeah, we're talking again about the chapter markers because I had very good success the first time. So I talked about it last week. And then I had more success this past time. And now the community is asking. Yes, this was prompted, this conversation point about feedback we got on the Discord, but I wanted to highlight it in the Better Podnerings because my experience and what I'm about to describe feels more appropriate for this section. And really, I was being asked how I'm using the chapter markers to edit. These are the OBS chapter markers. Well, let me recap a little bit about my editing workflow, because for those of you that don't know this, for the majority of my podcast history, I've edited it in a similar workflow. Essentially, as I record, I've taken timestamps as I go through of different issues or things that I think are going to need to be edited later. Traditionally, this has just been going into a Google Doc, and at the bottom, I've had a section where I write down time codes, and then as I go through and I edit, I work from the end, moving to the front. And the reason you have to do that is because if you work from the start to the end, you'll end up having wrong time codes. So that's how I do that. And when I'm writing these things down, it's usually things like hard edit points. Maybe if something was misspoken, it has to be resaid, or it could be things I notice, like maybe someone's track has some background noise, or someone says something that I think I can clean up. Traditionally, I just write down the timestamps, really quick description, because I'm also podcasting at the same time, but they're usually within a similar nature of what they are each week. Really, it doesn't deviate too much off the beaten path, just like Steven spoke over SP, or Steven interrupted SP, or Steven said too much, or Steven needed to let SP talk more. These sort of things. They're pretty standard things every time that we record. So when I ended up...
Don't let him fool you, folks. He's got more buttons for me on there.
So when I have edited in the past, this has worked quite well, but it has been very manual because, again, I'm going into a document and writing down all of these big timestamp logs that I have taken each time that we're recording. Well, with the new To Me tool of the OBS chapter markers, this is basically automating things. So what I'm now able to do through the OBS chapter markers edition, which was added last year to OBS, I am now able to basically program a hotkey where I can then trigger a marker to be put on the video at that point. Well, there's also a plugin that Scapmaker over on our Discord had linked me to that allows you to put a description onto that, because out of the box it's only marking the time code. So again, a lot of the times the things that I am editing are very similar. So I can have in there those preset markers. So things like interruptions or recues or muting a track or whatever. And I can just push a button and it will end up stamping it in OBS at that point. Well, you can do this through just OBS, through hotkeys, or even a panel that's in there. But I have a Stream Deck, so I actually want to have it so that I can push a Stream Deck button and trigger these things. But I don't like to rely on just one thing, especially when there is potentially a problem of losing that. And in OBS's case, where these chapter markers exist, one of the things they said when they announced these chapter markers edition is that the chapter markers are not written to the file until you stop recording. Meaning, if the OBS video program crashes, you will lose those chapter markers. And I hate that idea because I've been editing the same way for so long, and it has worked because I put it in a Google Doc and I know it's there instantly because it's an online platform that's automatically saving. Well, I discovered through this process that Stream Deck actually has a timestamp plugin that operates very similarly, where you can have a button on your Stream Deck, you push the button, and it will stamp the time code of that time with the comment that you want to put in there. when you do start recording, yeah, you have to start the stopwatch, so to speak. But once you've done that, you can have a button. And again, those preset ideas, it will timestamp and say Steven interrupted SP or whatever. So that way I have a backup set of time codes. So right now I've combined the two through Stream Deck, because in Stream Deck, you can basically have a multi-action button, meaning you program that button on the Stream Deck where if you push it, it will do multiple things. So what I have it is, if I push that button that says Steven interrupted SP, it will trigger the hotkey in OBS, therefore putting the chapter marker on the video, but will also run the Stream Deck timestamp and save it to a file, which seems to happen instantly, save it to a file, which is my backup. So it does both things at one time. And then on my Stream Deck, I have a bunch of different buttons in 3 different folders for these different things. So I have a folder for basically indicators of when we play music, which are things that are like, when we stream live, what happens is a lot of times there's gaps before and after the different segment intros. So I like to stamp that so I know go back and edit that out. And then I have a bunch of buttons within that folder to do with that. Then I have a folder for myself, and I have a folder for SP. So if I make a mistake, I just quickly go into that folder and find the corresponding note that I want to push that button. And the same thing with SP. They're basically the same actually between the two. It's just one says Steven did this, one says SP did that. And that's basically how I'm doing it, so that I now will, on my Stream Deck, push a button and it will tag in those 2 places and really continue with the workflow that I have personally established for my editing, just using an automatic tool rather than having to manually write down the timestamps. So if anyone has any other questions, come to the Discord. I know that was a little long, but people asked, and I couldn't not be long about it.
All right. Thank you for sharing all that. I actually learned a thing or two myself as I consider implementing something similar. Hey, Steven, as we've gone through all that, there's another routine, unfortunately now, Better Podcasting segment on the Rodecaster.
Oh, no.
We're not talking about my Rodecaster this time, though. We're talking about your Rodecaster.
Yeah, for those that didn't know this, I have a Rodecaster Pro 1. Overall, it's been fine. Yes, there's been some glitches. Well, for a couple of our recordings now, it's been weird for me. So when I've been monitoring, I have heard SP, but not me, sound a little bit echoey. And it's not been in the recording, but it has been just a little bit of a reverb to me. And then shutting down the Rodecaster Pro and turning it back on fixes this. This has happened twice now. Well, in our Discord, we also had somebody else post about a basically loss of recording, at least on their side, because they had a Rodecaster Pro 1 glitch as well. So there is definitely some problems creeping up, and maybe they're coincidences, but in any case, I cannot wait for some viable alternative to be out on the market.
We keep waiting for that 3rd version and stuff, and I was so hopeful that Rode was announcing the Rodecaster Pro 3 earlier, but they went video instead. So we'll see if they do a 3. They might not. We'll just see how it goes. All right, Steven, we have a whole community that actually talks with us on our Discord server.
Talks to you.
This is where we here at Better Podcasting turn the show over to you as we run through some of your feedback. We call this segment Better Podback.
All right, I had last week pitched the idea about possibly creating a garage sale channel on Discord. The idea being someone could just go and list gear that they might be interested in selling. There's a whole bunch of disclaimers that you and I both independently have come up with, thinking it would be a very smart decision on our part if we were to do this. But the idea was, give us your feedback. Do you think this is something you might be interested in? And we had a couple of responses.
We had Waffles saying a garage sale section could be useful. I'd much rather to sell to somebody from here. And Randy Walker said, I think a garage sale forum would be good. Definitely add that disclaimer. So we had a couple people say they wanted it. I think we need a couple more people before we actually implement it, say that they would like it. But there's also the part of me that was like, man, maybe we want to throw up a trial balloon and maybe try to sell something there. I know some people don't like to sell to people that they know because if something goes wrong with the item right after it's purchased, then it's like, oh, you sold me something that was not working correctly. I admittedly try to test everything before I sell it. There's some limited items that I just can't test, and I annotate them as such. And if they're a hot commodity, they will go ahead and be purchased regardless. But, I don't know. We'll see how many other people would like it, or maybe Steven, you want to go ahead and do it just with the interest that's there.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll throw out there is one of the sort of thoughts that I had when mulling this over is the fact that we haven't excluded these posts before, and we have put out there, including I think ourselves, when people have been selling gear, we've said that you can say on there, like, I'm selling this, and we've had a couple people do that. It hasn't been a lot, but the fact that we're open to those posts might be an indicator it would be okay. But yeah, there's a lot of potential downfalls there.
Indeed. All right. Well, we'll table that for now, and hopefully we'll hear from at least one or two other people that they would like it. Moving on, we did have DC Dave post, and he had an question really about the PodTrak P4. He said, finishing up the gear episode, glad to hear you still think highly of the PodTrak P4 since I picked one up on Prime Day. I used it as a co-host the other day with great success. Somebody else was hosting and recording, but I used it as my backup. I was able to record myself on one track and the incoming Zoom call with the other two co-hosts on track 4. That was then fed out mix minus back to the laptop, and it all worked as I hoped. So I'm in pre-production with my own first podcast, and the plan is to have 3 hosts, all remote. I'm just wondering, should I use the P4 or stick with the Zoom, quote, record individual tracks, unquote, feature? If I'm using the P4, what is the workflow to have 2 remote hosts connected via Zoom so I can record each separately while also allowing them to hear one another? Does that make sense? Trying to figure out the workflow for this. And that again was from DC Dave. I responded to this, and I think, Steven, you're the same ilk as me. Without a Skypeosaurus, as we did back in the day, and you could probably still do one with mix minus, right? But without a Skypeosaurus, you really can't do an individual track recording on an off-board hardware recorder. You can't do it with the Rodecaster Pro 2. I'm guessing you can't do it with the Rodecaster Pro. And I don't think you can do it with the Zoom P4. You can record yourself. You can record everybody else. And there's also, on all the devices that I just listed, sound pads that have its own individual track. On the Rodecaster Pro 2, you have the ability to go in and out from 2 separate computers. So you could, in theory, using a Rodecaster Pro 2, have a mix minus with 3 hosts. Yourself, somebody coming in from one computer and somebody or mobile device, and somebody coming in from another computer and a mobile device. You could actually go 3 with a Bluetooth connected device as well. So it is possible, but it is kind of skirting around how the device is meant to be used. The device is meant to be used as a local recording for 4 tracks, both the P4 and the Rodecaster Pro or Rodecaster Pro 2. If you're using a Rodecaster Duo, you're limited to 2 local tracks plus the in-outs from the USBs and Bluetooth. I think in most cases, I would go with some sort of online multitrack recorder, whether that's through Zoom. I use it through OBS. I'm able to get multitrack through OBS. And then I would do a backup with your own device. That's how I've been doing recording for years, as a matter of fact. I've always had an online recording through whatever I was using, and then I would have the Zoom H6 for years while we were doing this. My Zoom H6 was actually my primary recording, and because of the big mixer that I had, I could mix minus up to 6 different tracks. It was a pain, but I could do it. And I would have the backup recording online. I think a lot of people are doing the reverse these days, where they're doing their primary recording on their computer or through whatever application that they're using, and then getting their backup through their local recording on their local recording device. I will say, though, if I have a local recording of myself, I will treat that as my prime personal track. And in fact, when we do the Better Podcasting production, I record my track, Steven records his track. I send my track to Steven. It's up to him on whether he uses it or not, but I think it's a higher quality sound that he gets. It doesn't really matter in the end because a lot of the online stuff is a lot better than it used to be with the equipment that we're using and with the computers that we're using. So there is that, but I always treat my own production as I'm going to take my track from my Rodecaster Pro 2 and I'm going to use it in my post-production. Everyone else, it just depends on what the best track is. It's either their local recording, because all my co-hosts record themselves, or it's through the application that's being used. So, Steven, I know you have thoughts here. So,
yeah, I disagree with everything that you said. The only thing I'll throw in there is, of course, I would never dispute you. The thing I will throw out there is that I'm sure if you wanted to really get technical, you could come to our Discord. There are different softwares you can use that you can actually route things different ways. And depending on the platform you're using, you may be able to, through like Audio drivers or something else. If you do have something like a Rodecaster Pro, I don't know if the PodTrak P4 will, but also probably with the live track, you could potentially send some audio to different channels, but it's going to involve an extra layer of potential problems. So we're not going to suggest it. We're not going to recommend it. If you wanted to get sort of curious a little more, come to our Discord. We can maybe, I'm sure I can think of a couple people who are probably saying you can do it through this software is basically what I'm throwing out.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I will also add, if you have a microphone that has a USB out and an XLR out, using a device like a PodTrak P4 will allow you to go XLR out from your microphone into the recorder and have that local recording. I think that would be better than going USB into your device, whatever it is, whether it's a computer, a laptop, a mobile device, whatever. I think the USB is a neat and nice capability. It's very simple, but if you're going to be any sort of serious hobby podcaster whatsoever, I think you really need to get something like a P4 and be able to record a local track. There's numerous times. How many times have we, I mean, that's how I say my podcast story. How many times have we lost recordings and that somebody was able to save it because they had some sort of off-board local recording, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have the How I Say My Podcast story to begin with, because it happens a lot. So I would prefer to have a recording versus no recording at all.
Next piece of feedback, we had Randy Walker in our Discord, and he'd posted a photo of his Rodecaster Pro 2 or a Rodecaster Pro 2 trying to update with an error message on the screen next to the Rodecaster Pro 2. And he said, any ideas? First time this Rodecaster Pro 2 has been powered on, and there was an error message during the firmware update. You went in there, you said, have you tried updating it from the device? Because you can do device or firmware updates from the device itself. And he responded back saying that it worked. So keep that in mind. You can do it either way. If you're having issues trying to update it from the device, you might want to try the opposite and try it from the desktop connection. But honestly, you also might want to just cross your fingers and hope you don't break it.
Yeah, there is some, I've noticed, incompatibility between the Rode Central software that is available on computer and firmware levels. And it just depends on where you are on both. So the capability does exist to update from the device, but I have heard notable people within the podcasting community have their device break and nothing will save it. Not trying to update it locally on the device, not updating it through the computer. It just, they actually have to RMA it and they get a RMA device back. And again, I don't exactly love the RMA because you're getting somebody else's problem when you're getting the RMA from Rode itself. I would be much happier if I would get a new one, but I realize that economically that just doesn't work out for companies, including Rode. We have one more feedback, Steven, and I really like this because I was thinking the same thing myself.
So after all of the Stream Deck discussion last week and this week, we had Waffles, and he said, show us your Stream Decks! It was all caps, so I assume that that's what he wanted.
With an exclamation point too, yeah. So He was excited.
So I will go and post on the Discord there. So go ahead and I'll get that posted in the next few days. Come on over to betterpodcasting.com/Discord and I will post a picture over there.
Yeah, we're loving the conversation over on the Discord server. If you guys have any problems, if you recognize something that's new and available, I know recently somebody posted a deal on some production-like software that might be of value to people, and there was a lot of discussion about that, actually. So there's pros and cons on there. So come over to the Discord, and I have a lot of fun going there. I've mentioned it before. I get out of work. I can't have my phone or access to Discord at work. I get out of work. I go to my car, get on my phone. I'm like, I'm going home, both figuratively and literally within both driving home and having the Discord right there. So it's fun.
But that's going to take us to the end of this show. Before we wrap up, we will remind you we are part of the Gonna Geek Network. There's a bunch of awesome geeky podcasts over there. I will not say details, but there's rumblings that one Gonna Geek Network member might be coming on back at some point. So come on to Gonna Geek Network. Keep your eyes on all of the awesome podcasts over there. They are an amazing community. I was trying to think of a better word than amazing, but everybody is just amazing on the Gonna Geek community.
Yeah, it's welcoming place indeed. So we had the main topic this time being social media. We do want you to answer those questions and get back to us. Next time, we're going to be delving our toe into the podcasting 2.0 space. So if you have any questions about that and how it might apply to a hobby podcaster, get it to us in the next couple of days after this airs, and we might be able to talk about it on our next show.
So for episode number 308 of Better Podcasting, I'm Steven saying, find me on social media somewhere.
And MSP saying, I hope you're having fun with your show. We're having fun with ours. We'll see everybody next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Better Podcasting. You can find the full back catalog of Better Podcasting at betterpodcasting.com. If you're into geeky podcasts, please check out the other podcasts on the Gonna Geek Network at gonnageeknetwork.com. This show was produced and edited by Stephen Jondrew. Voice work was done by L.W. Salinas. Thanks again for listening or watching, and we hope to see you again next week.